All right, so we're diving into Dining with al-Qaeda by Hugh Pope.
Okay.
You specifically requested this deep dive to kind of explore some of these policy ideas, in light of everything that's been going on in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And I thought Pope's, decades of firsthand experience in the region offered a really unique lens for
Yeah.
that.
I think one of the things that's so striking about this book is the way that he uses these personal encounters.
Right.
Even just like seemingly mundane ones to really challenge our assumptions about the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about like the grand political narratives,
Right.
but it's about understanding the people, the
Yeah.
cultures, the perspectives that shape those narratives.
Exactly. And like even that story,
Right.
about the Syrian man who blames him, a random Westerner, for the Balfour Declaration.
Right.
A document from over a century ago.
Yeah, and I think that anecdote really highlights how these historical grievances, even those from, like the distant past, continue to shape perceptions and fuel conflicts in the region.
Yeah.
It's something that we often overlook
Yeah.
when we're trying to understand the current escalation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So thinking about policy ideas, right? One that you specifically mentioned was the one-state solution
Yeah.
for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Right.
And it seems like Pope's own experiences covering that conflict just point to how complex
Yeah.
and emotionally charged this is.
Absolutely.
He even talks about feeling personally blamed for the situation just because he's a Westerner.
Yeah, and I think that feeling of being held accountable, even though he's just a journalist,
Right.
really speaks volumes about the deep-seated resentment, the sense of injustice that kind of permeates this conflict.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that any solution, including a one-state solution, would require navigating these, deeply personal and historical layers of trauma.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if focusing on those personal connections, right? What Pope calls like people-to-people diplomacy could be a starting point.
Yeah.
He talks about bringing a Soviet journalist to interviews.
Right.
And how that simple act
Yeah.
completely shifted the dynamic. Could that be a model for bridging divides in the region today?
It's a compelling idea. Imagine applying that to the current situation.
Right.
Creating spaces for dialogue and understanding beyond the political posturing. It wouldn't be a quick fix.
Right.
But Pope's experiences suggest that fostering those kinds of connections can at the very least open up channels of communication.
Right. And speaking of communication,
Yeah.
you also asked about U.S. policy in the region, specifically engaging with Iran.
Right.
Pope's time in Iran, both before and after the revolution, offers some pretty intriguing insights there, too.
What's interesting is that, he doesn't shy away from portraying the contradictions within Iranian society. He has this story about a mullah with a hidden picture of a naked woman in his beard.
Oh, wow.
It highlights that tension between, the conservative religious establishment and the desires of many ordinary Iranians, especially the younger generation.
It's a good reminder that Iran isn't a monolithic entity.
Exactly.
Right. There's a lot of internal diversity, and understanding those nuances is crucial for any meaningful engagement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pope's experiences suggest that while there's this deep-seated mistrust between Iran and the West, there's also potential for cooperation.
Right.
But that requires a willingness to engage with Iran's complexities, not just its perceived threat.
But what about this broader issue of authoritarianism in the region?
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're interested in how Pope's book sheds light on the endurance of these regimes, especially in light of these recent pro-reform uprisings.
Yeah, Pope's encounters with authoritarian regimes, particularly his time in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, are chilling. He talks about a doctor struggling to treat cancer patients with outdated equipment because of sanctions.
Wow. That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
It really brings home the human cost of these regimes and the often unintended consequences of policies like sanctions.
And it raises important questions about how we approach countering authoritarianism. Is focusing solely on regime change effective? Or should we be looking at alternative approaches like supporting pro-democracy movements from within?
Right.
Pope's experiences suggest that those movements face immense challenges, but also have the potential to create lasting change.
That's definitely relevant to the current uprisings that we're seeing.
Absolutely.
Pope's coverage of the Syrian uprising and the Assad regime's brutal crackdown offers a stark reminder of the challenges these movements face.
The Syrian uprising is a tragic example of how easily pro-democracy movements can be crushed. But it also highlights the resilience of those fighting for change.
Yeah.
Pope's work reminds us that supporting those movements, while navigating the complexities of the region, is crucial if we want to see a shift towards more democratic and accountable governance.
But what I'm really curious about is how Pope's focus on these direct personal experiences can help us, especially as U.S. readers, make sense of all this.
I think that's where the true value of Dining with al-Qaeda lies. It challenges us to look beyond the headlines and the political rhetoric and to engage with the human stories that often get lost in those narratives. It's about understanding the Middle East, not just through statistics and policy papers, but through the lived experiences of the people who call it home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, one place where those personal stories really challenge our perceptions is Saudi Arabia.
Right.
We tend to have this very one-dimensional view of the country.
Yeah.
But Pope's experiences there reveal a much more nuanced reality.
Absolutely. He talks about meeting liberal-minded Saudis, especially women, who are pushing for change within a system that's incredibly restrictive.
It's like this fascinating tension between modernity and conservatism.
Exactly.
Right.
He tells this anecdote about a Saudi woman who runs her own interior design business, navigating a system that makes it incredibly difficult for women to work.
Right.
It highlights the contradictions within Saudi society, where you have these individuals pushing boundaries while the government maintains tight control.
But it's not just about social change, right? You mentioned the need for even-handed U.S. policies in the Middle East.
Right.
And Pope's chapters on Saudi Arabia really make you think about the complexities of that relationship. Especially the U.S. government's close ties with the Saudi royal family.
Yeah.
And he doesn't shy away from pointing out the hypocrisy there.
Absolutely. He critiques the U.S. for turning a blind eye to human rights abuses, the suppression of dissent, all while maintaining this strategic alliance.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that U.S. policy in the region is often driven by real politics, which can sometimes clash with our stated values.
It's a tough balance, for sure.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if promoting cultural understanding, as Pope advocates for, could help bridge that gap.
Yeah.
But then he also delves into the darker side of Saudi Arabia, specifically Wahhabism, and its connection to extremist groups like al-Qaeda.
He has that chilling conversation with that Saudi missionary who admits to spending time with al-Qaeda members. And I think that encounter really underscores the dangers of viewing Islam as a monolith.
Yeah.
Within Islam, you have this wide spectrum of beliefs.
Right.
And Wahhabism, with its strict interpretation of Islamic law, is just one part of that spectrum.
It's a part that's had a significant impact both in Saudi Arabia and beyond.
Absolutely.
And I think Pope's point is that to truly understand the roots of extremism, we need to engage with those beliefs.
Yeah.
Even if we find them reprehensible.
It's not about condoning those beliefs.
Right.
But it's about understanding the context, the motivations, the historical factors that contribute to their rise. It's only through that kind of understanding that we can develop effective strategies for countering extremism.
And that brings us back to the issue of state failures and the endurance of authoritarian regimes.
Yeah.
Pope doesn't just focus on Saudi Arabia.
Right.
He talks about the challenges faced by other countries in the region as well. He highlights the corruption, the mismanagement, the often brutal methods used to maintain power.
And he doesn't let the West off the hook either. He reminds us that our policies, our interventions, our support for certain regimes have often contributed to the very problems that we're now trying to solve.
It's that shared accountability that we talked about earlier. It's messy, it's complex, and it's definitely not easy to untangle.
Yeah.
But I think Pope's point is that recognizing that shared responsibility is the first step towards finding more sustainable solutions.
Absolutely.
And he offers some potential avenues, too. You know, he talks about the importance of engaging Iran diplomatically, despite the deep-seated mistrust.
Right.
he also highlights the need to support pro-democracy movements, even though those movements face immense challenges, as we saw with the Syrian uprising.
Right.
So it's about understanding the nuances, acknowledging the complexities, and then finding those pressure points where we can actually make a difference.
Exactly, and I think that's where Pope's focus on personal experiences is so valuable.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about armchair analysis or abstract policy debates. It's about grounding those discussions in the realities of the region, the human stories that often get lost in the grand narratives.
And speaking of human stories, there's one group that Pope encounters that I think really highlights the importance of cultural understanding. And its implications for policy. The Yazidis.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
You know, before reading this book, I knew very little about the Yazidis.
Me too.
You know, this fascinating and often misunderstood religious minority in Iraq.
And Pope's interactions with them, especially his visit with their spiritual leader, Baba Sheikh, paint this vivid picture of a community struggling to preserve its identity amidst so much chaos and violence.
It's a reminder that the Middle East is incredibly diverse, not just in terms of religions, but also in terms of cultures, ethnicities, and historical experiences.
And that diversity is often overlooked.
Yeah.
Especially when we view the region through the lens of conflict and terrorism. And Pope's encounter with the Yazidis challenges us to broaden our understanding. And to see beyond those simplistic narratives.
Absolutely. And that broader understanding has real policy implications. You know, he connects his experiences with the Yazidis back to the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Arguing that while the intention may have been to liberate, the unintended consequences of that invasion, like the destabilization of the region and the rise of extremist groups, put minorities like the Yazidis at even greater risk.
So circling back to your initial request, how can Dining with al-Qaeda help U.S. readers understand the Middle East today? I think Pope's answer would be this. It's about challenging ourselves to move beyond the headlines, to engage with the human stories, and to appreciate the nuances and complexities that shape the region.
He urges us to listen to the voices of those who are often marginalized, like the Yazidis, and to recognize that our actions, even those undertaken with the best of intentions, can have far-reaching and unintended consequences. It's a call for humility, for recognizing the limits of our understanding, and for approaching the Middle East with a genuine desire to learn.
We've explored policy ideas from engaging Iran diplomatically to supporting pro-democracy movements and promoting people-to-people connections. We've grappled with the complexities of U.S. policy and the enduring challenges of authoritarianism. But most importantly, we've seen how personal stories can illuminate even the most complex and seemingly intractable conflicts.
I think Pope would leave us with this final thought. Could a deeper understanding of the region's cultural and historical nuances, the kind of understanding he fosters through his personal narratives, lead to more effective and sustainable solutions for the current escalation?
That's a great question.
It's a question worth pondering as we continue to engage with this vital and ever-evolving part of the world.
And for those of you listening, we highly recommend picking up a copy of Dining with al-Qaeda.
Absolutely.
It's a journey through the Middle East like no other. And one that will leave you with a deeper appreciation for the complexities and the humanity of this fascinating region.
For sure.